The Fabaceae, the legume family, also called the pea family or the bean family. Previously they were called the Leguminosae. These are dicots, very wide distribution. It's a very large family. They're generally herbaceous, although there are certainly some trees and some vines. The leaves are usually alternate. They're often compound. They always have stipules. Flowers are unique, 5 free petals in a special keel and banner arrangement. They have 5 fused sepals for the calyx. They are insect pollinated, sometimes very specialized for certain insects. They also uniquely form nodules on their roots, which turn out to be a symbiosis with a bacterium, either rhizobium or bradyrhizobium, that the bacteria get carbohydrate from the plant, and the plant gets plant-usable nitrogen compounds from the deal. The fruit is called a legume. There are many, many, many economically important species in this family. Soybeans, particularly in Iowa, that comes to mind. Many garden vegetables, peas, beans, peanuts, chickpeas. In addition, flowers such as lupin and redbud. Grazing crops like alfalfa and clover, in addition to kudzu, which can be quite a problem, along with some other invasives like crown vetch and black locust in Iowa. Here are the flowers. You can see it's a typical pea flower. The one on the lower right has the front half of the flower cut off, so you don't see the petal that would have been closest to you. In the lower petal is called the keel. The 2 side petals on the lower half are called wings. And in the upper one is called a banner, or sometimes a standard. In Europeans that think of a flag as a standard. The calyx, 5 fused sepals. Inside is sort of a unique organization of some fused stamens and free stamens. The fused ones surrounding the pistil. So if you see flowers looking like this, you can be pretty sure you have a legume. Additionally, if you see the roots, you can see those nodules for nitrogen fixation. This is in the Asterales, family Fabaceae, probably the 3rd largest plant family, depending on what taxonomist you consult, a good 20,000 species worldwide. We are in the Asterales in the asterid group on our plant evolutionary tree. This is a short list of notable species. Soybean, lupins, local weeds, more of those out west than in Iowa, but some here even. Alfalfa, redbud, lovely spring blooming tree, wisteria. Carob, used as a chocolate substitute. Kentucky coffee tree, native to Iowa. Sweet pea, a nice garden flower. Peas, green beans, chickpeas, black-eyed peas, broad beans, faba beans, all garden vegetables. Black locust, honey locust are 2 trees you find in Iowa. The black locust being not native here, it's native a little farther east. It's invasive in Iowa. Honey locust is native. And then we have sort of the hall of shame of crown vetch, bird's foot trefoil, sweet clovers, red clover, and white Dutch clover, all brought here as forage crops or erosion control, and tend to be enormously problematic in natural areas. They're very difficult to keep under control. For self-defense, it's hard to beat the honey locust. Puts out these enormous thorns, 5-6 inches long. They're even branched in some cases. They obviously are going to deter about anything that would want to graze on them. Even young trees have pretty significant thorns, and enough to deter anything from even rubbing against them, let alone actually grazing on them. Humans had a lot of uses for these in the days before we could commonly buy needles and awls and things like that. They were used as pins. It's even called the Confederate pin tree because in the South, when the Confederate War was sort of winding down, the Southern soldiers were in dire straits. They actually used broken off thorns of this as pins to keep their clothes together. Additionally, they were used to pin sacks of cotton together, and even for carding the cotton in some cases. They were used in microscopy to transfer tiny little bits of things, and beadwork and different uses for a good, strong, sharp, durable, pointy thing. Like poking holes in leather and a lot of other things, as you could imagine. And interesting, there's a bird called a loggerhead shrike that is actually a bird of prey, but it doesn't have the strong claws that you think of on eagles and hawks. And so it has a hard time catching its prey and then hanging on to it while it can, as it tears off hunks of flesh. So it will spear the victim on the honey locust thorns and keep it in place for dismemberment. Soybeans. Can't talk about legumes in Iowa without talking about soybean. You can see the map on the upper right. It's the soybeans harvested per acre on average in different counties, and Iowa is definitely in the heart of the bean belt. United States is significant soybean producers, about 32%, which last year for us meant 3 trillion bushels. That is a lot of soybeans. A bushel weighs about 56 pounds, so several train loads full of course soybeans went back and forth in the U.S. It took about 70 million acres to produce that much beans, and that had a $36 billion value. So as far as the U.S. economy, this is one important legume. It's also important in Brazil and Argentina. You can see in the lower right the increase in acres that they have just in the last 10 years. They have increased their acreages enormously, so that now between the two of them they produce close to half of the world's beans. The bean is actually native to China and was initially brought to the U.S. as a forage crop, like our alfalfa is now. We switched over to using it for protein and oil production in the 1900s, but there still was not an enormous amount of it produced. In 1929, only 9 million bushels. However, in World War II, it led to our supply of edible fats and edible oils being cut off due to warring factions that prevented importing those products, and so that caused the U.S. Government to promote production of soybeans for oil and fat in the U.S. And by 1940, a decade later, we had 78 million bushels being produced. Then in the 50s, it was discovered that it made a good meal, which a low-cost soy meal was a good low-cost, high-protein quality feed ingredient for livestock, and that spurred enormous increase in poultry and beef production. Today, an additional important use is for production of biodiesel that has fluctuated over the years with the fluctuating degree of federal support. However, at this point, we're up to about 1 billion gallons of biodiesel a year being produced, and taken about 48 pounds of soy to produce 1.5 gallons of biodiesel. So quite a bit of soy is going into biodiesel production today. Another interesting legume is the peanut, particularly interesting for the way it grows its fruit. The plant isn't, particularly remarkable when it's still in the vegetative and flowering stages, but once it is pollinated, the pedicel on the flower elongates towards the earth and pokes the actual flower down into the ground, and so that the peanut actually matures underground. And so even though they're above ground when they're pollinated, the fruit is found below ground when it's ripe. So this is interesting for production, in that machinery has to come along and scoop up the whole plant and then turn it over so that the little pods dry and don't get fungus on them. They sometimes get a fungus called aflatoxin, which is extremely toxic, and obviously you want to avoid that. It has been produced. It's not native to the U.S. It's native to South America. It's been used down there for many hundreds of years. However, George Washington Carver found that it was suited to southern U.S. and that it could be a crop that could be useful to struggling farmers there, and worked to come up with many different recipes and usages for this to help promote it in the South. Today, however, China is the world's largest producer. It's used in an enormous range of Asian foods and different products. It's worldwide used to help with malnutrition in areas that have had famine. The peanut butter in particular is easily stored and highly nutritious. Additionally, the oil in peanut is considered to lower your bad cholesterol, so many people use it sort of like they're attracted to olive oil for the same reason. There is a significant portion of the U.S. population and others worldwide that are quite allergic to peanuts, and so they have to be very careful if peanut products are in anything they might eat, even a small trace amount, it can cause an anaphylactic reaction. This obviously is a negative for the peanut producers. They have to be extremely careful about how they market their products and make sure that everything is labeled very carefully. There are many other uses that are non-human, including bird food, varnishes and paints, nitroglycerin, insecticides, and some cellulose products and glue are made out of peanut. Nodules. Another novel thing about the legume family is they produce these funny nodules on their roots that at first glance you'd think would be evidence of some horrible disease. And actually, it's a good thing. It's a symbiosis with the bacterium that invades the root hair and induces the plant to form this nodule under very sort of specific structures, and in particular they are set up so that it's anaerobic, and that anaerobic condition, which means there's no oxygen inside those nodules, and that allows the bacteria to produce a compound, an enzyme that they use to take atmospheric nitrogen, two nitrogens triple bonded to one another, in and break it apart and then produce single nitrogen compounds that are useful to the plant. Atmospheric nitrogen is not useful as a fertilizer source to plants. So the plants go from being bathed in nitrogen that they can't use in the atmosphere to having it useful forms actually produced in their roots. In exchange, the carbohydrate that the plant gets from photosynthetic action is provided to the bacteria for their growth and reproduction. So it is a symbiosis in that each partner is getting something out of the deal and paying for something out of the deal. It's not always quite as friendly as it sounds. If the plant gets sick, the bacteria can sometimes become parasitic. But when it's working well, it's a beautiful thing, and obviously very important for agricultural interests, because legumes that have these nodules then don't need nitrogen fertilizer, which is a very, very expensive fertilizer. It takes a lot of energy to produce nitrogen fertilizers. And additionally, like in Iowa, the corn-bean rotation, the beans leave a lot of nitrogen in the soil. Then next year the corn can take advantage of that. Interesting horticultural or lovely horticultural species is the lupin. There are quite a few different species of these. Most of what we see in the Midwest is Lupinus perennis, and here you can see it growing in Glacier National Park, growing quite large stands there. Typical pea flower, obvious on the right, palmate leaves rather than pinnate, but nevertheless part of the legume family. And very important because there is an endangered butterfly species called the Carner blue that will only use lupins as its host plant for the mother to lay eggs on, for the caterpillar to eat. So the reduction in the natural range of lupins nationwide has led to the reduction in this little butterfly population. Still another novel legume is the sea heart. It's called Entata gigas, which has the largest legume pod that anybody has documented. You can see a little girl holding that on the right. And she has a seed in her other hand. They say these pods can be as long as 5 foot. I don't think she's quite 5 foot tall, but it's still a darn significant looking pod. And in the lower right you can see some where people have found them on the beach. Why these are called sea hearts is because they're a little bit heart-shaped and they float up on the sand. It's thought that they're large, and then they have this air pocket inside them that helps them with buoyancy and helps them distribute, so they can float for longer and farther and wind up on the beach someplace and germinate. It is a liana, which is a woody vine. The young lady on the lower left is sitting on a vine on the stem of one of these sea hearts, and so obviously quite a sturdy plant, and that also probably explains why it can grow such a large seed pod. Native to the tropical areas in Caribbean and North Africa. Okay, this next slide is another novelty. It's the sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica. On the right you can see the photograph triggering from the leaves all open to the leaves all shut. If you look at the two little pink flowers on the upper right, you can see that it is the same spot in the universe being photographed. This tendency to close up at night, is very common in legumes. Soybeans even do that to some extent. And the closing up at night and opening in the daytime is considered a nyctinastic movement. This, however, is considered third monasty, or thigmonastic movements, because it's in response to touch. It's thought that this is a protection against herbivory by insects. The insect is probably going to just fall off the plant if it shakes it very hard, and possibly desiccation. If it's really windy, these plants are likely to close like that, and that will help produce water loss. It's an interesting process that lets this happen. It's a special organ called the pulvinus. It's somewhat similar to the stomata on the lower parts of the leaves that open and shut pores to either increase or decrease oxygen and water diffusion and CO2 from the plant. This happens much more rapidly, though, so it's not quite the same. And I'll see if I can play you the video here on the lower right. You can see a lovely little sort of a flat of these plants that are all quite fresh, and someone rubbing their hand over it and causing them to close up extremely quickly. This isn't something a plant can do on and off all day long. As a matter of fact, you'll kill them if you do that enough. It does take some energy for them to be able to do that. For example, in the morning, if they have just responding to the sun and opened up to photosynthesize, they are not responsive to touch. And if, for example, you waited 15-20 minutes, these will be are being touched here. Will be opened back up. If you come back to do it again right away, they've lost some of their sensitivity, so they have to sort of have a chance to recover in between each opening and shutting. But it is fun to watch and interesting to think of a plant being able to move so quickly. We think of plants as responding, slowly to the sun or something, rather than being able to jump shut like those do. Iowa native plants. Here's a picture here of a redbud. It's one of our spring blooming trees. Iowa is at the very northern edge. Central Iowa even is the very northern edge of growing this species. It's common to almost weediness in Missouri and other southern areas. There's a lot of it in central Des Moines. Even if you get up into Ames and Fort Dodge, they tend to say a redbud is a deadbud. So it has to be very carefully sighted if you're going to try and use it this far north. It blooms a little bit after the crab apples and has sort of a distinctive purpley red flower and heart-shaped leaves. So between the leaves and the flowers looking like the pea family, legume family flowers, it's pretty easy to separate that from a crab apple. Other species, we do have a lot of legumes in Iowa. They were important in the prairie that we had, probably because of their nitrogen fixing ability. They could cope in areas and help other plants in areas where nitrogen was low. Honey locust, we already talked about, with the big thorns. Leg plant's a lovely little shrub that grows in the prairies and some savannas. Purple prairie clover, and I'll show you in the next picture. We have ground plums. That's our astragalus. Illinois bundleflower is a large mimosa-type flower of the legume family here. Round-headed bush clover, cream wild indigo. There's also white wild indigo, is a much taller species. Partridge pea is an important annual legume in Iowa. Shoytic trefoil, important, very pretty. Also the plant that produces the little stick-tights that come home on your socks that are sort of triangular and flat. Wild licorice, among many others. Here's a photograph of purple prairie clover. Cute little plant, grows kind of a tutu of flowers in a circle that extends up the flower as they age. And also there is a white prairie clover. Toxicity, there's plenty of toxicity in this family. Local weeds are sort of commonly known. They have and primarily the problem is caused by an alkaloid called swainsonine, which was first found in Swainsona, one of the genuses that you find a lot of this. But astragalus in our west is kind of famous for causing livestock and some native animals, elk and deer, to develop this locoism. They act crazy. That's kind of why it's called loco. They get aggressive. They're clumsy. They hold their head down and kind of foam at the mouth, and it does sometimes lead to death. Phaseolus, like your kidney beans and lima beans, can be pretty bad to you if you eat them not completely cooked. And that's because there is a lectin in them called phytohemagglutinin that will cause some pretty severe stomach upsets if you don't have it completely destroyed by the time you consume them. Lupin is what we think of as a flower, but in some areas it's actually grown as to produce a meal for animals and for some human consumption. The humans that are used to eating it know that they need to go through quite a prolonged process of soaking and boiling and storing it in cold water, considerably more than what you do to just cook a bean like a kidney bean. And occasionally people that don't know that find out that these alkaloids can cause great regret. Rotenone is an insecticide and fish killer that has been used for years as sort of an organic because it was naturally produced by a couple different genera of legumes, Loncocarpus and Daris. However, people have gone off thinking, well, just because it's natural, then it's good or okay. In particular, this one is very toxic, and it's very broad spectrum. You put it in your pond to kill some carp you don't want, it kills every fish in there. It kills every insect that it hits. In addition, now they're seeing some correlation with Parkinson's disease in people that have used a lot of rotenone. So many reasons to avoid that one. There is an extremely toxic lectin found in some tropical legumes called Albus precatorius and a couple others in that genus. It's an attractive little bean. You can see it there on the right. It's actually used for jewelry. It's quite small, and they are strung together or glued in clusters on things, even into rosaries. However, it's very toxic. It's more toxic than the poison that's found in castor beans. And remember, castor beans are not real beans, but they are really poisonous. This one has LD50 of 1 nanogram per kilogram. And what that means is if you had a population of 100 humans and they were all dosed with 1 nanogram of this chemical for every 2.2 pounds that they weighed, 50 of them would die. A nanogram is a very tiny amount. It's 1 billionth of a gram, I think. And so this is considered a select agent, which means under federal law, if you want to have this for research or any laboratory purposes, you have to be permitted to do that. That's somewhat offset by the fact that because it's been used for jewelry, it's been brought into Florida, which is tropical enough that it can grow there. It has actually escaped and become available in the wild in some places there. They say 1 bean is enough, 1 seed there is enough to kill somebody. Okay, for more information, if you're interested in generalities, there you are with the Wiki and Hawaii and another one at University of Las Vegas websites. And then additionally, there's a peanut festival in Dothan, Alabama every year. It's November, first 2 weeks of November this year. That concludes the Fabaceae.